Rivalries are one of the best parts of sports, and when it comes to rivalries, there is nothing that compares to college football. So today, I'm going to be ranking the top 10 rivalries in college football. We're only doing current rivalries, so we're not going to look at rivalries that have been lost to conference realignment or have just gone cold over the years. So with that said, let's get into it. Starting off at number 10, we have Harvard versus Yale, otherwise known as The Game. This rivalry is one of the oldest in the history of American sports, dating all the way back to 1875. Harvard and Yale have met a staggering 139 times, with Yale winning 70 to Harvard 61. The game has seen some amazing moments over the years, both on the field and off, with the 1968 version being one of its biggest on-the-field moments, a game that saw both teams enter undefeated for the first time since 1908. This matchup is most famous for Yale blowing a 29-13 lead in the final 42 seconds of the game, prompting Harvard fans to claim victory, as the Harvard newspaper would read Harvard beats Yale 29-29. Another classic moment from this rivalry was in 2004 when a group of Yale students pulled off an unbelievable prank when they got Harvard fans to hold up pamphlets that spelled out "We suck," a legendary prank, something quite common over the history of this rivalry. Harvard would get the last laugh that day, however, winning 35-3. This is a must-watch rivalry game every year and easily deserves a spot on this list. Coming in at number 9 is Arizona versus Arizona State, also known as the Duel in the Desert. The Wildcats lead this rivalry with 51 wins to the Sun Devils' 44, with one tie along the way. This rivalry dates all the way back to 1899, before Arizona even became an official U.S. state. This rivalry became particularly heated in the 1950s, when Arizona and its supporters vehemently opposed to Arizona State changing its name from the Arizona State College to Arizona State University, a battle that the University of Arizona would go on to lose. This rivalry also holds some interesting historical significance, as leading up to their 1968 matchup, in which the winner was supposed to earn a spot in the Sun Bowl. However, Arizona coach Daryl Mudra delivered an ultimatum to the Sun Bowl committee, as he wanted the Sun Bowl to choose Arizona over Arizona State regardless of the outcome. The committee agreed, and Arizona would go on to get spanked by the Sun Devils 30-7 in what ultimately became known as the Ultimatum Bowl. This would lead to the creation of the Fiesta Bowl a few years later, which continues on today as part of the college football playoff. This is an interesting rivalry with plenty of hate attached to it, making it a must-watch every year. Coming in at number 8 is Florida State versus Miami. Now, this rivalry doesn't have the 100 years of history that some of the others do, but it still has plenty of classic moments and hatred attached to it. Miami holds the slight edge with 35 wins to Florida State's 33. Since the 1980s, this has easily been one of the best rivalries in college football, as these two teams have oftentimes met up with national title implications on the line for at least one of the two sides. Some of the classic moments from this great rivalry include this series of missed field goals from Florida State kickers. On 6 separate occasions, Florida State kickers have missed either game-winning or game-tying field goal attempts in the final moments of the game. One of these such occasions in 2000 led to a massive controversy, as Florida State was chosen over Miami by the BCS rankings, despite both teams having one loss and Miami having won the head-to-head. The Noles would go on to lose to Oklahoma in the national championship game. This rivalry has also seen some classic moments over the past decade, with Florida State winning thanks to a blocked extra point in 2016, and the following year Miami getting their revenge with a last-second touchdown pass, ending a 7-game losing streak to the Noles in the process. Florida State has been in control of this rivalry as of late, winning 10 of the last 14 matchups. But it's still a must-watch game every year and one of the best rivalries that the sport has to offer. Next up at number 7 is Notre Dame versus USC, a rivalry featuring two of college football's biggest brands that dates all the way back to 1926. Notre Dame holds the lead in this rivalry with 51 wins to USC's 38. A couple classic moments from this rivalry include the 1971 edition, in which USC entered as a massive 21-point underdog. This game is most memorable for a brawl that took place after a fumble from USC quarterback Jimmy Jones. A scrum would ensue, the benches would clear, and a good old-fashioned fistfight would ensue. USC would go on to pull the massive upset that day, winning 28-14. Another classic moment was in 1988, the one and only time that these two teams have met while being ranked number 1 and 2 in the country respectively. Notre Dame head coach Lou Holtz would leave two of his star players at home for disciplinary reasons. Despite that, his Irish had one of their best performances of the year, defeating the number 2 Trojans 27-10. This is one of the games that took place during Notre Dame's famous decade of dominance in the rivalry, in which they beat the Trojans 11 straight times and 12 out of 13, with a tie in 94 being the only outlier. This is a classic rivalry and easily one of the best in college football. It is an absolute must-watch every single year. Coming in at number 6 is the backyard brawl between Pitt and West Virginia. This is a classic rivalry, and in the world of modern day college football, it's one of the few rivalries that's actually coming back. The Panthers lead this rivalry with 62 wins to the Mountaineers' 41, with 3 ties coming along the way. Classic moments from this rivalry include the 2007 edition, in which West Virginia entered as the number 2 team in the country. A win would have likely clinched a spot in the national championship game. But the Panthers had other ideas, as they would walk into Morgantown and earn a 13-9 victory, spoiling the Mountaineers' hopes of a national championship. The 2022 edition was another classic between these two sides, as they renewed their rivalry after a 12-year break. West Virginia would storm back in the fourth quarter after trailing by 7, and Pitt would come back to tie the game with just over 3.5 minutes left, and the Mountaineers would have a chance to go down and score a game-winning touchdown. However, Mountaineers quarterback JT Daniels would throw a back-breaking pick 6 to Pitt's MJ Devonshire, and the Panthers would hold on for a 38-31 victory. This is an underrated rivalry in college football, but easily deserves a spot on this list. Coming in at number 5, we have the Egg Bowl between Ole Miss and Mississippi State, a Thanksgiving weekend tradition filled with hate. Ole Miss leads this rivalry with 65 wins to Mississippi State's 46, with 6 ties along the way. This rivalry has produced plenty of epic moments over the years, including in 1983, where the Bulldogs, down by 1, had the chance to kick a game-winning 27-yard field goal. However, a strong gust of wind caused the ball to literally sail, and the Rebels held on for a 24-23 victory. Fast forward to 1999, where Ole Miss held a 20-6 lead with just 8 minutes left. The Bulldogs would come all the way back to tie the game with less than 30 seconds left. The Rebels would choose to go for the win instead of playing for overtime, a costly mistake, as Rebels quarterback Romero Miller would throw an interception and the Bulldogs would kick a game-winning field goal, securing a 23-20 victory. And who can forget in 2019 when Ole Miss wide receiver Elijah Moore scored a game-tying touchdown, but then proceeded to do this in the end zone. He was flagged for unsportsmanlike conduct, which moved the Rebels' extra point back. They missed it, and the Bulldogs held on for a 21-20 victory. The Egg Bowl is filled with good old-fashioned hatred and plenty of classic games, making it one of the best rivalries in college football. Coming in at number 4, we have the Red River Shootout between Texas and Oklahoma. One of the greatest spectacles in sports, there are very few things that compare to the Red River Shootout at the Cotton Bowl. The Longhorns lead this rivalry with 63 wins to the Sooners' 51, with 5 ties along the way. The Sooners, however, have had the better of this rivalry in recent years, winning 11 of the last 15 battles. This is one of the most heated rivalries in sports, period. Who will ever forget when prior to their 1976 meeting, Texas head coach Darrell Royal publicly accused Oklahoma of spying on them, something that Sooners head coach Barry Switzer would go on to confirm years later. That matchup in 76 would go on to end in a 6-6 tie. In recent years, these two teams have played some of the greatest games of the series, with the 2020 matchup being one of the most memorable, as in front of a limited crowd, these two engaged in an epic shootout, living up to the original name of the rivalry. The Longhorns would have to storm back after trailing by 14 entering the fourth quarter, and after forcing overtime, both teams would go back and forth until the fourth OT, when Oklahoma would force a Sam Ehlinger interception that sealed a legendary 53-45 win for the Sooners. This rivalry continues to be one of the best in sports, with no signs of slowing down anytime soon. Coming in at number 3, we have the best rivalry in the SEC in my opinion, and that is the Iron Bowl, Alabama versus Auburn. Alabama leads this historic rivalry with 50 wins to Auburn's 37, with one tie between the two. This is easily one of the most heated rivalries in sports. It divides the state of Alabama and has been known to cause violence or vandalism a time or two. Like after their 2010 matchup, an Alabama fan poisoned the famous trees at Toomer's Corner, where Auburn fans would gather to celebrate victories. That fan would later go on to say, "I just wanted Auburn fans to hate me as much as I hate them." So yeah, there's a lot of animosity here. These two schools have also given us some of the most amazing finishes in the history of the sport, like the kick six in 2013, where it looked as though the matchup was heading for a dramatic overtime. But then, with 1 second left on the clock, this happened.
Remember, a block kick can go the other way, too. You got to be careful and get it up.
On the way. No, returned by Chris Davis. Davis goes left. Davis gets a block. Davis has another block. Chris Davis. No flags. Touchdown. Auburn.
Exactly 10 years later, these two would give us yet another all-time classic finish, as Auburn looked as though they were just seconds away from pulling an epic upset that would have ended Alabama's chances at a playoff berth. But in Nick Saban's final Iron Bowl, the football gods would have one final miracle left in store for the legendary coach.
That's all it is. But there's a lot of airspace to cover for Milroe. Still looking. Firing. Near corner. It's caught! Touchdown, Alabama!
The Iron Bowl will continue to be one of the best rivalries in football. Good old-fashioned red versus blue hatred. It really doesn't get much better than that. Speaking of red and blue hatred, at number 2, we have the current most toxic rivalry in college football, Michigan versus Ohio State. The hatred and pettiness that these two schools have for each other is unmatched. Michigan holds the lead in this rivalry with 61 wins to Ohio State's 51, with 6 ties along the way. Michigan was well ahead in this rivalry prior to the Buckeyes' run from 2001 through 2019, which saw them win 17 of those 19 matchups. This is easily the most toxic rivalry in college football right now. These two schools have hatred for each other that goes back decades, and while there's always been animosity between the two sides, it wasn't until the 10-year war from 1969 through 1978 where things got really heated. It saw the legendary teacher versus student rivalry, with Woody Hayes being the teacher and his former player Bo Schembechler playing the role of the student. During that 10-year span, Michigan came out on top with 5 wins to the Buckeyes' 4, with a tie in 1973. These two have also had modern-day classics like their historic battle from 2006, a game in which both teams entered undefeated and the winner would likely head to the national championship game. Michigan sparked a furious rally after trailing all game long, but it wasn't meant to be, as the Buckeyes were able to hold on for a legendary 42-39 victory. Ohio State would then go on to get spanked by Florida in the national championship game. Needless to say, this is one of the best rivalries in sports, period, and the pettiness and hatred that these two teams have for each other makes it a must-watch every year. Finally, coming in at number 1, we have what I believe is the greatest spectacle in sports. It's Army versus Navy. There is nothing else like it. The games have a pageantry and a meaning to them that cannot be overstated. This is also a very competitive rivalry, as over its 124 meetings, Navy holds the slight edge with 61 wins to Army's 55, and there's also been 7 ties. It's a very competitive rivalry that has delivered some all-time classics throughout the years. The last 2 matchups in particular have been some of the best in recent memory, with the matchup in 2022 being the first matchup between these two teams to go to overtime. Army would force a goal line fumble that all but sealed the win for the Black Knights. Then, last year in 2023, Navy nearly pulled off a miraculous comeback after trailing by 14 with just under 5 minutes left in the game. And for the second year in a row, it would come down to a goal line stand from Army, sealing their 6th win in the last 8 matchups. Some football snobs may not love it, but they can kick rocks. The Army versus Navy rivalry is the best rivalry in college football, and there is nothing that compares to it.